Hey, what's up guys, I'm TF, and today we'll be looking into the worst episodes that Family Guy has ever produced. Now don't get me wrong, Family Guy has made episodes that have changed the standards of animation as a whole. However, there are some outliers. There are some episodes that have just gone wrong. Now, these episodes are filled with scenes of vile, nasty, and cruel behaviors that would make anybody think, now why the am I watching this? Oh, here, I got a checklist. Let's see here, we got some eye-opening moments.
Open your eye.
Check. We got the school shootings.
Time to make all those popular kids pay for ignoring me.
Check. Domestic violence? Check. And finally, necrophilia.
Because I want to nail a dead French maid. Giggity, giggity.
Check. Yep, the perfect list of horrible ideas. Now, the majority of these jokes aren't laughable. More like they want to be as awkward as possible or trying to make an attempt at being funny. I don't know. And some of these scenes make me feel that Seth MacFarlane is having some suicidal thoughts at night. And with that being said, if you actually like any of these Family Guy episodes, and that's fine, it's great for you. Really, all this is my own personal opinions, and this all boils down to your own preferences for Family Guy. Anyways, before we get started, quick disclaimer. The majority of these clips I'm about to show you have way more scenes of violence than in a typical episode of Family Guy. So if this bothers you, then you should probably dip. Alright, on to number 10.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
April and Quahog. Man, what would you do if the world suddenly came to an end? Would you become even more of a better person, or would you act rude, idiotic, and completely psychopathic to all of your loved ones? Well, that's Peter in a nutshell, but in this episode, he takes this to another level. Here's the rundown. The news broadcast makes an April Fool's joke about the world coming to an end, so Peter runs rampant and creates chaos for those around town and his own family, which all is leading up to him saying that he wishes his kids were never truly around. Now, this is the same guy that purposely threw his own baby under the car. He constantly abuses his wife and openly stated he beats his children. Let's not forget all the other messed up things he does to the random people in town on the daily. So let's just say this is a casual day for him. In the end, however, he simply apologizes and hands out a brand new Xbox to his family, and they instantly forgive and forget, which happens in just about every episode now. And honestly, it's hard to even watch Peter in this episode, especially once he says this.
Can't earn your kids' respect, you can always buy it.
Number 9.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Trump Guy. Now this episode represents your everyday generic modern Family Guy episode. You see, in this one, Peter becomes the new press secretary for the White House for some reason, and the family moves in. Later on in the episode, Meg gets touched inappropriately by Donald Trump, and what followed after is a chicken-style fight between Peter and the president, which in my opinion might have been dragged out a bit, but overall it was still entertaining to see. The main issues I have with this episode is the pacing and delivery. I mean, they had scenes littered throughout this episode with the characters talking to the camera about any political event suited for the times. They also had the usual treat Meg bad gag, showing how nobody cared about her until Ivanka Trump dolled her up. But then guess what happens after she gets dolled up? She gets touched by Donald Trump, obviously. So after all this happens, we get a random rant where Trump says that since Peter Griffin gets to do whatever he wants, then why can't he? Which makes zero sense, but it's probably something he'd say. Really, this episode had a lot of potential, but it simply couldn't deliver a better plot. I mean, there's a lot of smart political humor you could use throughout this episode. Or, what I would have done is, you should have Peter accidentally stumble upon a huge political scandal in which we would have to face Donald Trump in the same fight. Same result, but better plot. Anyways, this episode just dropped the ball. And like I said before, this episode isn't the best, but check it out if you want a good example of a bad Family Guy episode.
From our family to yours, we're very frightened.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Peter Asment. Now, if that episode didn't make you feel bad for Peter, then this definitely will. So in this episode, Peter is getting sexually harassed by his boss Angela. And she does this because Peter isn't wearing his glasses apparently. Which is strange to say the least. Anyway, she makes Peter do a lot of demeaning activities while on the clock. So just making him bend over to pinch his behind and make him wear denim shorts while forcing him to cool himself off. And it only gets worse from here, folks. After all of this though, Peter confronts Lois about it, and guess what? She laughs at him, saying no woman can sexually harass a man. Anyways, the harassment continues until Angela demands Peter to sleep with her. So, Peter then decides to ask the guys for help, and they say that if he doesn't get with it, then you're pretty much gay. But if you do get with it, then you're still a whole person. Because, you know, Peter is still married. So Peter decides to have Quagmire sleep with her in his place. But he does a complete 180 and says it's a no-go once he saw her. Which ultimately led to Peter quitting his job and storming out of Angela's house. But in a fit of rage, he decided to go back. But he notices that Angela is trying to off herself. And this is the point where I hate this episode. Because for the rest of the episode, they play it off that Angela is the victim. And Peter should feel like a jackass for not hooking up with her, all because she's lonely. Anyways, they end the episode by Peter sleeping with Angela. Psych. Mort did all the work. All in all though, this episode turned a decent Family Guy character into a pathetic, manipulating, female dog. So yeah, your typical Family Guy episode. Alright, on number 7.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Brian Griffin's House of Pain. Fun fact, this season marks the trend of awful Family Guy episodes. Now this episode starts off amazingly with Stewie fighting in a jet with Rupert to some classic Star Wars based scenes. However, it went right into Brian being a pretentious scumbag about his writing. And we then get a scene where Stewie gets his head cracked open while he proceeds to vomit. And if that isn't gross enough, guess what? That's applause. Everybody trying to cover up Stewie's wounds so that each person won't get into trouble. Hell, Peter went as far as throw Stewie underneath the car to save himself from trouble, which is sickening. I mean, I feel disturbed watching this episode to the point where it makes Peter especially irredeemable. I mean, why does Family Guy, a comedy, try to tackle parental abuse situations like this? It makes the family as a whole awful human beings. Alright, number 6.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Screams in silence. Now this is an infamous episode of Family Guy where they try to tackle domestic violence. And obviously since it's on this list, it failed to deliver this promise. But I have to admit, at the beginning of the episode, they actually handled it with some dignity, at least. And the jokes throughout this episode aren't really all that bad. They even had the famous Rock Lobster song in this episode. However, things went bad really quick as we see Jeff beating Brenda. So, the guys decided to take Jeff into the woods and off him. Following, we get some grueling scenes where we see Jeff beating up not only Joe and Peter, but we also see him trying to attempt to strangle Quagmire to death. Which, yes, was awkward to see. So yes, this episode is bad. In the end, however, the gang gets away to killing Jeff and they forge a fake note to Brenda. So yeah, this episode is bad, but I give it a try just to see how bad it holds up to compared to the rest on this list. Alright, on to number 5.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Seahorse Seashell Party. Now, I enjoy a nice slow-paced episode just like anybody else, but this episode takes slow to a whole level. I mean, it's like the writers decided to take the week off. So this episode is set entirely inside Griffin's house, with the family being bored. So now, what could possibly be more fun than watching the family do nothing for 21 straight minutes? Oh, I know, maybe if we add in the side plot where Brian goes on a drug trip, and we see a world full of random drugs to the animators. But no, the episode is filled with this. Now, this goes on for over a minute before something else actually happens. I mean, the only good part about this episode is Meg finally standing up for herself, rather than letting the family run her. But in the end, even that plot fails, because she decides to go right back to being the lightning rod for the show. But that's a story for another day. And if you can get by the first part of this episode, then you might sure gold with this one. Alright, on to number 4.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Brian writes a bestseller. Now this episode is obviously about Brian writing a bestseller. So in this episode, Brian writes a bestseller, which makes his ego grow massive. Brian wrote a book into the self-help category, which gave him an excuse to act more egotistical than imaginable. Now there is a part towards the end where Brian gets taken down in a live action interview with Bill Maher, but all this doesn't make up for Brian acting like a pretentious jerk throughout this episode. No, I'm not saying that Brian is a complete waste of a character. In fact, he has just as good of a track record of being in amazing episodes, such as when he's paired up with Stewie. We get the best Family Guy episodes imaginable. But when you make him out to be this egotistical maniac, I really start to miss the days when he wasn't even a part of the show. Anyways, I digress. On number 3.
Well, at least it's not raining. It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Herpy, the love story. Yes, the title says it all, so let's dive right in. This episode starts off in typical Family Guy manner, with Peter attacking his kids and the civilians with a whip. Then Brian gets to eat his herpy. Alright, so you already know this episode is awful. I mean, the visuals are disgusting to the point where it makes the viewers vomit. And this episode is just filled with this type of disgusting visuals of gore and absolute disgust. I mean, honestly, how can a show even produce such a messed up episode? I mean, if you ultimately want to lose viewership, this is a great way. Hell, if you want to make someone pay up, sit them down and make them watch this full episode. So really, this is just a gross out episode, so I'd recommend skipping this one.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Brian's a bad father. Brian throughout this episode is constantly manipulating his son to further his own career. So yeah, the entire episode is based on how Brian keeps on using his son until he ultimately takes too much and loses his only connection with his son. And throughout this episode, we see Peter also acting just as horrible to Quagmire for no reason. Even the jokes in this episode have an awkward grasp to it, like this episode was made to annoy the audience. Coupled with the fact there's the most infamous joke in this episode where Peter damn near tells the audience how to off themselves. And to be honest, that joke was incredibly offensive to say, even in an adult comedy. Who would actually sit there and laugh at such a joke? All in all, it's just a horrible episode. Skip it. Unless you want to see Brian at his worst.
It's a tiny, tiny world. It's a tiny, tiny world.
Married with cancer. Alright, you should know that if your relationship with somebody is built upon the fact that you each couldn't find anybody else to get with, then usually that means that your chances of surviving as a couple could also be in jeopardy. And that's what Brian learns out of this episode. Because you see, in this episode, Brian goes out to find a girl, but strikes out every chance he gets. Why, you ask? Because he acts like a horn dog. Anyways, he eventually finds a girl named Jess, who is suffering from cancer and is due to pass away. So, Brian decides to help her out by completing her bucket list, which is filled with them sleeping with each other in awkward positions and awkward places. So, really only benefits Brian, really, but you know. However, the whole nice guy facade is taken down quickly, since Brian was instantly rewarded with attention from the press and tons of clout chasing girls. So Brian had already knew who he was going to get with after Jess dies, but unknowingly the ceremony gets interrupted with news that Jess is going to live. And this led to a whole mess of problems, which is probably for another video within itself, which we're going to skip over. So pretty much things went bad. So bad that it led to Brian wanting to end the marriage. And since he knew he couldn't divorce her because he'd lose all the attention he's been working for, he decided not to save her life when she was choking. Which of course, unknowingly, they brought Jess back to life and Brian was once again miserable. But the very next episode, this is all fixed up because now Brian was all one out. Pretty much what I'm saying is he started to let go of himself the same way Jess had. To save another 10 minutes, she had scheduled Brian to be put down to save herself some trouble. Which in the end is the same thing that Brian did to Jess. So they had the final scene where they decided to stay together because they both wanted to off each other and so they're both just so unhappy. So maybe they should just tough it out. Which is kind of how they ended up where they are. So anyway, so at the end, Family Guy pushed the everything is okay button and magically Jess is dead and the family is back together again. So ultimately, my beef with this episode is that it's just horrible on many levels. From Brian hooking up with this chick just for the attention, just trying to put Brian down since he couldn't handle Brian's obnoxious self, to Brian intentionally not saving Jess's life to get out of the marriage. All in all, just a garbage episode. And it still holds to me to be the worst Family Guy episode produced. Alright, now that that's all over with, I'd like to mention there are some great episodes from the later seasons. Episodes such as Brian and Stewie that take this classic duo through a horrible situation where they're each forced to confront each other's beliefs and come to terms with each other. Or even the Family Guy Simpson crossover where, another banger episode, where Homer gets into a classic chicken fight with Peter with them both ending things in good terms. My point being that for every bad episode, there's always a gold turd that's left out there somewhere for someone to find. Anyways, that's my list for the top 10 worst Family Guy episodes. Is there any I missed? Do you have a least favorite yourself? Let me know in the comment sections down below. Now, as always, thanks for watching. Now, if you want to support this channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Helps me out a lot. As always, I'm TF, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya!